Hey guys, it's me. I'm back. It's your boy, Jam does stuff, Jamdy stuff, if you would. I know it's been a minute since I've actually come and done some reading, or at least of this in particular. And I know it's been a minute. It's been like probably at least a month since like Christmas time ish. And with the new year and just new things happening, like school year starting, at least for me, like third year of college starting and stuff, it's just been kind of busy and hectic. Probably, I hope, same for you guys as well. But now finally, I'm able to break some time away and I'm going to do some more reading of this. I'm going to aim for another like 20 something minutes, probably next 2 to 3 chapters. We'll see how long each chapter is in actuality. And we're going to get to it. But before that, I would like to go over what we read last time, vaguely speaking, because it has been a minute. So in the first book and the first two chapters, it mainly talks about us, human nature, and what we kind of just think and believe without having to think about it. I have the book in front of me. It talks about the law of human nature and some objections to that. And the book itself is called Right and Wrong, as clue to the meaning of the universe. And in the main part, it mainly just goes about how even without subconsciously thinking about it, we all kind of agree and believe in these some sort of like moral right and wrongs, yet truths and false lies in the world. So it mentions things like how when something happens to us and something happens to someone else, we're gonna be like, oh, that is unfair or that's fair or unfair when something similar happens to us. So we instinctively, without really having to be told this, understand or believe there should be some sort of like rules and laws and like a game or narrative structure, so to speak, in all these things. And so that is somewhat proof of God and the existence thereof, at least in the God part, not necessarily whole Christianity. We'll probably get to that. Just in that, because it's basically saying we all kind of instinctively know we're already in a game being overrun and being led by someone else. It's this idea of intelligent design and intelligent creatures is proof of an intelligent designer, right? So in the same way, if you look at a house, you don't have to be told that there's a house builder or a builder. You just know because there's a house there that there is a builder. It's kind of that route, at least how I understood it. But if you don't believe me, you should read the book for yourself. I think it's very simple. It's not even that long of a book. And I think the words, don't let the words fool you or anything. It's actually fairly simple to read and easy to understand and fast to read because of that. And C.S. Lewis is just a good writer. This is one of the most definitive, well-known Christian books out there. I do really like it a lot. Anyways, that's kind of a breakdown of last time. I guess we'll get into it now, finally. And let me find some music to start. There we go. Play that and that. Chapter 3, The Reality of the Law. I now go back to what I said at the end of the first chapter, that there were two odd things about the human race. First, that they were haunted by the idea of a sort of behavior they ought to practice, what we might call fair play, or decency, or morality, or the law of nature. Second, that they did not, in fact, do so. Now, some of you may wonder why I called this odd. It may seem to you the most natural thing in the world. In particular, you may have thought I was rather hard on the human race. After all, you may say what I call breaking the law of right and wrong, or of nature, only means that people are not perfect. And why on earth should I expect them to be? That would be a good answer if what I was trying to do was to fix the exact amount of blame which is due to us for not behaving as we expect others to behave. But that is not my job at all. I am not concerned at present with blame. I am trying to find out truth. And from that point of view, the very idea of something being imperfect, of its not being what it ought to be, has certain consequences. This kind of going like what I said before, of how we kind of expect things to be a certain
Nice.
way. Like we kind of subconsciously know that there is a ruler with that has placed rules in place for us. If you take a thing like a stone or a tree, it is what it is, and there seems no sense in saying it ought to have been otherwise. Of course, you may say a stone is the wrong shape if you want it to use for a rockery, or that a tree is a bad tree because it does not give you as much shade as you expected. But all you mean is that the stone or tree does not happen to be convenient for some purpose of your own. You are not, except as a joke, blaming them for that. You really know that given the weather and the soil, the tree could not have been any different. What we, from our point of view, call a bad tree is obeying the laws of its nature, just as much as a good one. Now, if you notice what follows, if it follows that what we usually call the laws of nature, the way weather works on a tree, for example, may not really be laws in the strict sense, but only in a manner of speaking. When you say that a falling stone always obeys the law of gravitation, it is not this much the same as saying that the law only means what stones always do. You do not really think that when a stone is let go, it suddenly remembers that it is under orders to fall to the ground. You only mean that, in fact, it does fall. In other words, I hope this is simple, you cannot be sure that there is anything over and above the facts themselves, and any law about what ought to happen, as distinct from what happens, as distinct from what does happen. The laws of nature, as applied to stones or trees, may only mean what nature, in fact, does. But if you turn to the law of human nature, the law of decent behavior, it is a different matter. That law certainly does not mean what human beings, in fact, do. For as I said before, many of them do not obey this law at all, and none of them obey it completely. The law of gravity tells you what stones do if you drop them, but the law of human nature tells you what the human beings ought to do and do not. Why is it playing fighting game music? What? Okay, that was weird. What human beings ought to do and do not. In other words, when you are dealing with humans, something else comes in above and beyond the actual facts. You have the facts, how men do behave, and you also have something else, how they ought to behave. In the rest of the universe, there does not need to be anything but the facts. Electrons and molecules behave in a certain way, and certain results follow. And that may be the whole story, but men behave in a certain way that is not the whole story. For all the time you know that they ought to behave differently. And this, again, when we're talking about, we're all kind of aware of the fact that there is a quote-unquote correct way to go about things, or we have some idea thereof. Like we kind of know there are some rules in place. And this is really so peculiar that one is tempted to try and explain it away. For instance, we might try to make out that when you say a man ought not to act as he does, you only mean the same as when you say that a stone is the wrong shape. Namely, that what he's doing happens to be inconvenient to you. But that is simply untrue. A man occupying the corner seat in the train because he got there first, and a man who slipped into it while my back was turned and removed my bag are both equally inconvenient. But I blame the second man and do not blame the first. I am not angry, except perhaps for a moment, before I come to my senses with a man who trips me by accident. I am angry with a man who tries to trip me up even if he does not succeed. Yet the first has hurt me and the second has not. Sometimes the behavior which I call bad is not inconvenient to me at all, but the very opposite. In war, each side may find a traitor on the other side very useful, but though they may use him and pay him, they regard him as a human vermin, so you cannot say that what we call decent behavior in others is simply the behavior that happens to be useful to us. And as for decent behavior in ourselves, I suppose it's pretty obvious that it does not mean the behavior that pays. It means things like being content with 30 shillings when you might have gotten £3, doing schoolwork honestly when it would be easy to cheat, leaving a girl alone when you would like to make love to her, staying in dangerous places when you would rather go somewhere safer, keeping promises you would rather not keep, and telling the truth even when it makes you look a fool. One moment. All that reading, dry throat. So some people say that though decent conduct does not mean what pays particular person in a particular moment, still it means what pays the human race as a whole, and that consequently there is no mystery about it. Human beings, after all, have some sense. They see that you cannot have any real safety or happiness except in a society where everyone plays fair, and it is because they see it this way that they try to behave decently. Now, of course, it is perfectly true that safety and happiness can only come from individuals, classes and nations being honest and fair and kind to each other. It is one of the most important truths in the world, but as an explanation as of why we feel as we do about right and wrong, it just misses the point. If we ask, why ought I be unselfish? And you reply, because it is good for society. We may then ask, why should I care what's good for society, except when it happens to pay me personally? And then you will have to say, because you ought to be unselfish, which simply brings us back to where we started. You are saying what is true, but you are not getting any further. If a man asked what was the point of playing football, it would not be much good saying in order to score goals. For trying to score goals is the game itself, not the reason for the game. And you would really only be saying that football was football, which is true, but not worth saying. In the same way, if a man asks what is the point of behaving decently, it is no good replying in order to benefit society. For trying to benefit society, in other words, being unselfish for society, after all, only means other people. It's one of the things decent behavior consists in. All you are really saying is that decent behavior is decent behavior. You would have said just as much if you had stopped at the statement, men ought to be unselfish. And that is where I do stop. Men ought to be unselfish, ought to be fair. Not that men are unselfish, not that they like being unselfish, not that they ought to be. The moral law, or law of human nature, is not simply a fact about human behavior in the same way as the law of gravitation is, or maybe simply a fact about how heavy objects behave. On the other hand, it is not a mere fancy, for we cannot get rid of the idea. Most of the things we say and think about men would be reduced to nonsense if we did. And it is not simply a statement about how we should act, or how we should like men to behave for our own convenience. For the behavior we call bad or unfair is not exactly the same as the behavior we find inconvenient. It may even be opposite. Consequently, this rule of right and wrong, or law of human nature, or whatever you would like to call it, must somehow or other be a real thing, a thing that is really there, not made up by ourselves, and yet is not a fact in the ordinary sense. In the same way as our actual behavior is a fact, it belongs or begins to look as if we shall have to admit that there is more than one kind of reality, that, in this particular case, there's something above and beyond the ordinary facts of men's behavior, and yet quite definitely real, a real law which none of us made, but which we find pressing on us. And that's the end of that chapter. And then maybe if we have enough time, I'll try and finish this whole book. I think there's 5 in this one, in this first book of it. Really interesting, really good. Love that. Well, the reality of the law. I will say this is probably the most confusing chapter I read so far, from what I remember. And I feel bad for reading it because it felt confusing hearing it out loud. But I think it kind of just said exactly what I said before, in as much as it's explaining and saying that because we all believe that there is this law outside of what we feel and say and think, that there must be something else, right? Like a spiritual, godly, heavenly plane existence, something that's beyond our understanding and view that we are able to measure and see. That's more or less what I'm getting from it. It's very simple. I feel like, because things are good because of something outside of itself, right? And I think the football thing kind of works that it mentions, but it's a little confusing. The reason why say you should play football isn't just to play goals, because that's the whole point of the thing, but it's because it's a good thing outside of itself, is what it's trying to say. So when I say you should play football, I'm basically saying you should do that because it is a good thing overall. Not, in my opinion, we mean it objectively speaking when we do this, generally. And because we think that generally for a lot of things, even though it's not technically provable in regards to that, it's provable that we all kind of believe and understand some other rule of this reality and plane, if you want to call it that. Let us sum up what we have reached so far. In the case of stones and trees, things that of sort we call the laws of nature may not be anything except a way of speaking. When you say that nature is governed by certain laws, this may only mean that nature does in fact behave in a certain way. The so-called laws may not be anything real, anything above and beyond the actual facts which we observe, but in the case of man, we saw that this will not do. The law of human nature, or of right and wrong, must be something above and beyond actual facts of human behavior. In this case, besides the actual facts, you have something else, a real law, which we did not invent, and which we know we ought to obey. I now want to consider what this tells us about the universe we live in. Ever since men were able to think, they have been wondering what this universe really is and how it came to be there. And very roughly, two views have been held. First, that there is what called the materialist view. People take that view, think that matter and space just happen to exist and always have existed. Nobody knows why, and that the matter behaving in a certain fixed way has just happened by a sort of fluke to produce creatures like ourselves who are able to think. I think I know where this is going, and I like this topic. By one chance in 1,000 something hit our sun and made it produce the planets, and by another 1,000th chance the chemicals necessary for life. And the right temperature occurred in one of these planets, and so some of the matter on this earth came alive. And then by a very long series of chances, the living creatures developed into things like us. The other view is a religious view. According to it, what is behind the universe is more like a mind, that it's like anything else we know. That is to say, it is consciousness and has purpose and prefers one thing to another. And on this view, it made the universe, partly for purposes we do not know, but partly at any rate in order to produce creatures like itself. I mean, like itself to the extent of having minds. Please do not think that one of these views was held a long time ago and that the other has gradually taken its place. Whenever there have been thinking men, both views turn up. And note this too, you cannot find out which view is the right one by science in the ordinary sense. Science works by experiments. It watches how things behave. Every scientific statement, in the long run, however complicated it looks, really means something like, I pointed a telescope to such and such a part of the sky at 2:20 a.m. on January 15th and saw so-and-so, or I put some of this stuff in a pot and heated it to such and such temperature, and it did so-and-so. Do not think I am saying anything against science. I'm only saying what its job is, and the more scientific a man is, the more I believe, he would agree with me that this is the job of science. And a very useful and necessary job it is too. But why anything comes to be there at all, and whether there is anything behind the things science observes, something of a different kind, this is not a scientific question. If there is something behind, then there either will have to remain... If there is something behind, then either it will have to remain altogether unknown to men, or else make itself known in some different way. The statement that there is any such thing, and the statement that there is no such thing, are neither of them statements that science can make. And real scientists do not usually make them. It is usually the journalists and popular novelists who have picked up a few odds and ends of half-baked science from textbooks who go in for them. After all, it is really a matter of common sense. Supposing science ever became complete so that it knew every single thing in the whole universe, it is not plain that the question, why is there a universe, why does it go on as it does, has any meaning, would remain just as they were. One moment, I need to change this. I don't really like this song right now. At least not for this. No, I like this one. Yeah, this is a good one. Yeah. Why does it go on as it does? Has it any meaning? What would remain just as they are? Or what would remain as it does? Right here now. Now, the position would be quite hopeless, but for this, there is one thing and only one. In the whole universe, which we know about, in the whole universe, which we know more than we could learn from external observations. That one thing is man. We do not merely observe man, we are men. In this case, we have, so to speak, inside information. We are in the know, and because of that, we know that men find themselves under a moral law, which they did not make and cannot quite forget, even when they try, and which they know they ought to obey. Notice the following point. Anyone studying man from the outside as we study electricity or cabbages, not knowing any language and consequently not able to get any inside knowledge from us, but merely observing what we did, would never get the slightest evidence that we had this moral law. How could he? For his observations would only show what we did, and the moral law is about what we ought to do. In the same way, if there were anything above or behind the observed facts in the case of stones or the weather, we, by studying them from the outside, could never hope to discover it. The position of the question then is like this. We want to know whether the universe simply happens to be what it is for no reason, or whatever there is a power behind it that makes it what it is. Since that power, if it exists, would be not one of the observed facts, but a reality which makes them, no mere observation of the facts can find it. There is only one case in which we can know whether there is anything more, namely our own case. And in that one case, we find it there is. Or, put the other way around, if there was a controlling power outside the universe, it could not show itself to us as one of the facts inside the universe. No more than the architect of a house could actually be a wall or a staircase or a fireplace in that house. The only way in which we could expect it to show itself would be inside ourselves as an influence or a command trying to get us to behave in a certain way. And that is just what we do to find ourselves. And that is just what we do find inside ourselves. That's weird. Surely this ought to arouse our suspicion. In the only case where you can expect to get an answer, the answer turns out to be yes, and in the other cases where you do not get an answer, you see why you do not. Suppose someone asks me, when I see a man in a blue uniform going down the street, leaving little paper packets at each house, why I suppose that they contain letters. Excuse me, pardon me. Why would I suppose that they contain letters? I should reply, because whenever he leaves a similar little packet for me, I find it does not contain a letter, or it does contain a letter, sorry. And if he then objected, but you've never seen all these letters which you think the other people are getting, I should say, of course not, and I shouldn't expect to because they are not addressed to me. I'm explaining the packets I'm not allowed to open by the ones I'm allowed to open. It is the same about this question. The only packet I am allowed to open is man. When I do, especially when I open this particular man called myself, I find that I do not exist on my own, I am under a law, that somebody or something wants me to behave in a certain way. I do not, of course, think that if I could get inside a stone or a tree, I should find exactly the same thing, just as I do not think all the other people in the streets get the same letters as I do. I should expect, for instance, to find that the stone had to obey the law of gravity, that whereas the sender of the letters merely tells me to obey the law of my human nature, he compels the stone to obey the law of its stony nature. But I should expect to find that there was, so to speak, a sender of letters in both cases, a power behind the facts, a director, a guide, or as I like to say, a builder. Do not think I am going faster than I really am. I am not yet within 100 miles of the God of Christian theology. All I have got to is something which is directing the universe. Okay, yeah, I get what he's saying. Something that's directing the universe, and which appears to me as a law urging me to do right and making me feel reasonable and uncomfortable when I do wrong. I think we have to assume that it is more like a mind than it is like anything else we know. Because after all, the only other thing we know is matter, and you can hardly imagine a bit of matter given instructions. But of course, it need not be very like a mind, still less like a person. In the next chapter, we shall see if we can find anything more about it. But one word of warning, there have been a great deal of soft soap talked about God for the last 100 years. That is not what I am offering. You can cut all that out. That's the end of the chapter. No, in order to keep this section short enough when it was given on the air, I mentioned only the materialist view and the religious view. But to complete, I ought to mention the in-between view called life force philosophy, or creative evolution, or emergent evolution. The wittiest expositions of it come to the works of Bernard Shaw, but the most profound ones is those of Bergson, whoever that is. People who hold this view say that the small variations by which life on this planet evolved from the lowest forms, to man there were no due to chance, but to the striving of purposeness of life's force. When people say this, we must ask them whether by life force they mean something like a mind, or something with a mind, or not. If they do, then a mind bringing life into existence and leading it to perfection is really a god, and their view is thus identical with the religious. If they do not, then what is the sense in saying that something without a mind strives or has purposes? This seems to me fatal to their view. One reason why many people find creative evolution so attractive is that it gives one much of the emotional comfort of believing in God, and none of the less pleasant consequences. When you are feeling fit and the sun is shining and you do not want to believe that the whole universe is a mere mechanical dance of atoms, it is nice to be able to think of this great mysterious force rolling on through the centuries and carrying you on its crest. If, on the other hand, you want to do something rather than shabby, the life force being only a blind force with no morals and no mind, will never interfere with you like that troublesome god we learned about when we were children. The life force is a sort of tame god. You can switch it out when you want, but it will not bother you. And all the thrills of religion and none of the cost. Is the life force the greatest achievement of wishful thinking the world has yet seen? Question mark. And let me check time. 23 minutes. Okay, yeah, I'll just talk a little bit more, and then I'll say the next chapter, or the last chapter, and the next book for next time. To go over that, this kind of did more or less say exactly what I was talking about, and this is one of my favorite subjects, topics of debate and such in regards to Christianity and God about that, is the fact that we were created, and there's proof, quote unquote, about it, in being that we exist. And him saying, and it's a little weirdly worded, I find, but I think you still get the gist of it, which is to say that we know there's a builder. I said this already. I know there's a painter because I can see the painting, right? If there's a painter with no painting, then that would break all laws of the universe as we know it. Because there's a painting, there must be a painter. And that painter created everything in that painting. The colors, the laws, the strokes, and all this stuff. Which is the basic argument here he's talking about for God. I think it's really good when he's saying things. I don't even know exactly where this. He's talking about the two views. On myself. Yes. And so we only know the things that we know, like about ourselves, about men. We have an inside thing, as he said about it, right? He said we have the inside knowledge. We have the cheat code. We're in the know, so to speak. Which is true. We know men, we know ourselves. And based on everything we know and can observe about ourselves, about the universe, all these things, it does point to the fact that there's some sort of law that just is the case, that when there's a creation, there is a creator, more than likely. And he kind of addresses the other beliefs that like, oh, some people think that nothing created everything, but that he doesn't actually really mention that, I don't think there, but he kind of does very lightly for like a second, that it's kind of illogical and that's not the case we see in the universe around us, right? You can't point to me a time where just where something came from nothing. Like in reference to especially us, right? Human intelligent life. Life always comes from life. So animals always come from animals, or living creatures if you want to go down to like the molecular bacteria cellular level. But in a larger sense, human beings always come from human beings. So intelligent life always comes from intelligent life. And so that would only mean that us as a species and creation in general originate from an intelligent mind, an intelligent being that we call God. And like he says here at the end as well, he's just talking about God in general. Like he's not talking about the Christian God, Hindu God, Muslim God, Roman gods. He's just talking about what he can observe from the universe, which is that there must be a creator, because that follows the laws of things we're able to view. For every creation, there is a creator. And that we can only, this is all based on scientific observations, which also I like his point with saying science isn't a religion, sort of sense. We kind of treat it, especially in modern day now, as a religion and like a whole belief structure, when science is just observations, right? Science can't tell me right from wrong necessarily, because that's a moral thing. But science can tell me based on observations and chance and factors and probabilities that this thing is likely to happen and that this thing is less likely to happen. And I do like that you said earlier, somewhat with like the mentioning people as well, that we're just kind of pattern recognizing. So when he mentions the guy taking letters to each door and he's guessing based off his letter that the other letters are letters. And he doesn't know that, of course. He doesn't know what is in this letter, this mailman's bag, but he's making an observation based on the pattern that he has received and that he can see. And we as human beings are pattern recognitions, which is why also the belief of God is so prominent, even outside of, say, the United States. Across the world, there are tons of religious beliefs. It's kind of similar how there's the whole belief of the flood, how a lot of places have a flood-like story about the earth getting totally flooded, which that doesn't prove anything, but at the very least, it makes things more probable or likely, so to speak, because we're all kind of on a similar track, right? It's when in class, everyone has the same answer, but they all have it through different means. The fact that we all arrive to the same answer, while it doesn't prove it, does prove that maybe we're all on the same track or somewhat understanding of the process. And that's really cool. But yeah, I'll leave the music going. Thank you for watching. If you like this, if you want to watch more, leave a comment, something, leave a like, that'd be cool. And then as well, I do a lot of gaming and other content things all the time with me and my friends. No, it's me and my friends, it's a little more vulgar, and I apologize for that. But thanks for watching. God bless you guys. See you guys next time.